Welcome back. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a really critical subject, the management of nutrition and diet for patients with thyroid cancer.
Right, and what's so striking here is the core conflict. It's not just about the physical illness, it's about the psychological stress that directly, well, it sabotages their nutritional health.
It absolutely does. The main challenge really isn't just the tumor itself, it's the immense psychological distress that follows a diagnosis.
And that distress leads to this core belief, this panic, really, that eating feeds the tumor.
Exactly. Which then leads patients down this path of non-scientific, often extreme starvation diets. And the result is severe malnutrition.
And the numbers on that are staggering, aren't they? The initial weight loss, it's something like 70% psychological?
70% psychological, only 30% pathological. And that early malnutrition, it just completely undermines the patient's ability to tolerate what comes next.
It really does. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, all of it depends on the patient being strong enough.
So the key takeaway, right, from the start, the elevator pitch has to be this. The focus must be on maintaining energy and preserving muscle.
Through a balanced, and individualized diet.
Yes, supervised by clinical experts, not by restricting entire food groups out of fear. But, let's talk about that fear. That patient psychology is probably the highest leverage area to address.
It has to be the first step, because patients are terrified and they start advice shopping. They're looking everywhere for answers.
And they end up buying unverified supplements, powders with no labels,
Which just makes the malnutrition worse and, frankly, wastes a lot of money. The usual advice to just be calm and consult experts, it just doesn't work when someone is in a state of panic. It feels too passive.
It does. I think the opportunity here is to reframe it, to give the patient back a sense of control. Maybe structure the intervention as a kind of patient contract.
A contract? What do you mean by that?
Well, one focused on control, verification, and setting really small, achievable goals. If a patient feels they can't control the cancer, they'll try to control what they eat, right?
Right, that makes sense. You have to redirect that energy.
Exactly. So for example, instead of just saying ignore bad advice, you give them a concrete task.
Like what?
Like, bring me everything you bought, every supplement, every powder, every expensive functional food. We will review it together.
I see. So you make the clinical nutritionist the gatekeeper.
Precisely. It turns that fear of the unknown into a controlled medical review process. It gives the patient their sense of agency back, but in a safe, productive way.
That's a much more active approach. I like that. So, building on that, let's tackle the biggest myth head on, the idea of starving the tumor.
Yes, the science is sound, but we need to connect it directly to the consequences. It's not just about general weakness.
Well, the core weakness in the explanation is it's just saying that the tumor consumes the patient's muscle and fat. That's true, but it doesn't sound urgent enough. It sounds like, generic wellness advice.
So how do we make it more urgent, more clinically potent?
We have to tie muscle mass directly to the feasibility of treatment. It's not just about feeling strong. It's about being able to receive the medicine that saves your life.
So you're talking about dosing.
Exactly. Let's be explicit. For so many treatments, especially chemotherapy, the dose is calculated based on the patient's weight and body surface area. It's a precise calculation.
And if the patient's weight plummets because they've been starving themselves,
Then their muscle mass collapses, and the medical team has no choice but to reduce the dose of the chemotherapy.
which directly compromises how effective that therapy can be.
It's that simple. We're not just preserving muscle so the patient feels better, we're preserving it so they can receive the full, life-saving dose of their treatment. That's the message that cuts through the fear.
That framing changes everything. It's incredibly powerful. And of course, this whole psychological battle is happening on top of very real physical challenges.
Oh, absolutely. The location of the thyroid itself is a problem.
Right, it's in the neck. So as a tumor grows, it can put mechanical pressure on the pharynx, on the larynx.
Which leads to difficulty chewing or swallowing, dysphagia.
And that physical problem then feeds right back into the emotional one, doesn't it?
It's a vicious cycle. The dysphagia, plus the anxiety, plus the stress, it all contributes to early satiety.
Let's break that down for a moment. That feeling of being full almost right after you start eating. There's a hormonal reason for that, isn't there?
Yes, the stress response triggers hormones like cholecystokinin, CCK, and CCK's job is to signal fullness to the brain.
So when you're under chronic stress, you're essentially getting a chemical signal that's tricking your gut.
Exactly. It's telling you you're full when you've barely eaten anything. It makes getting enough calories in a day a monumental battle.
Which naturally leads patients toward foods that are easy to swallow, but often nutritionally empty.
Right. Things like thin, plain rice porridge or, a clear white broth, they offer volume, but almost zero nutritional value. Zero leverage?
So the strategy has to be a complete shift in focus, away from volume and entirely towards energy density.
Pack the most nutrition into the smallest possible space.
And we need to be very specific about what that means, not just soft food.
No, not at all. We should be talking about preparing soups or pureed foods with high-energy formulas, maybe aiming for a 1-to-1 or even a 1-to-2 ratio of solids to liquids.
And that density has to come from the right places.
Absolutely. It needs to be from diverse protein sources, pureed meat, fish, along with vegetables, not just starch. This is how you fight the muscle wasting we were just talking about.
Okay, so that leads us to the next strategy, managing the poor appetite with what's called fractional feeding.
Small, frequent meals. Given that rapid satiety from CCK and the stress, it makes perfect sense to break meals into, say, 4 to 9 small feedings a day.
It's a sound intervention, but there's a potential pitfall here, isn't there? A pretty significant one if you're not careful.
There is. A general recommendation for energy-dense, pureed meals can be, well, a disaster if you don't account for comorbidities.
You're talking about diabetes.
I'm talking about diabetes. If you're relying on soft, pureed foods, which are often highly processed carbohydrates, to boost that energy density.
You risk huge glycemic spikes, dangerous blood sugar spikes.
Exactly. So the suggestion has to be that energy density cannot come at the cost of metabolic control.
So the concrete advice has to be incredibly specific here.
It does. It has to detail that for a diabetic patient, every single one of those small energy-dense meals must be meticulously balanced. You need the protein and the fat in there to slow down the absorption of those carbs.
It has to be individualized. There's no one-size-fits-all puree.
Never. Okay, let's pivot to the last big area of confusion, the dietary restrictions. This is where the myths really run wild.
They really do. The widespread and usually unnecessary avoidance of things like cruciferous vegetables and soy.
It's a huge pitfall. And this is where the messaging has to be assertive. Clinical reality has to override anecdote and fear.
So the weakness is the patient's fear that these foods, the ones with goitrogens like broccoli, cabbage, soy, will somehow interfere with their thyroid health.
Yes, so our suggestion has to be to establish a clear default to inclusion policy.
A default to inclusion. I like that. Meaning the nutritional benefit almost always outweighs the theoretical risk.
Except during very specific medically mandated periods. And to make that stick, we have to explain the mechanism. Why are people scared of these foods in the first place?
Right. So these foods contain compounds called goitrogens.
And goitrogens can, in theory, affect how iodine is absorbed or metabolized by any remaining thyroid tissue. Or they can interfere with hormone replacement therapy.
So that's the why. Now the actionable advice has to be the when.
Exactly. And the when is the key. The restriction of these foods is only necessary if the clinical team mandates a low iodine diet, which is a very specific protocol.
And that's usually only done for a short time right before radioiodine therapy.
Precisely. Or if a patient's blood work shows clear deficiencies or surpluses in their circulating thyroid hormones, their free T3 or T4.
And if neither of those conditions are met,
then these foods are essential. They provide fiber, micronutrients, all the things needed to fight cachexia and stay strong. The default is you eat them.
That kind of clarity is what patients need. Okay, so let's move into long-term management, after treatment.
This is another area where a big assumption is often made.
That nutritional leads just go back to normal because the tumor is gone.
Which is a critical mistake. So the suggestion has to be to move beyond simple metrics like weight or BMI. We need a much deeper assessment.
This is where we need to introduce the idea of hidden malnutrition.
Yes, this is a common clinical oversight.
A patient might have a normal BMI, maybe even be slightly overweight, let's say a BMI over 23.
So on paper, they look fine.
They look fine, but what's hidden is that they have very low functional muscle mass and a high percentage of body fat. They are in fact incredibly frail.
And if you just tell them to eat more because they look okay, you're giving the wrong advice.
Completely wrong. So this is where we need to suggest more advanced tools. A body composition analysis, like a DEXA scan or bioelectrical impedance. Something that can actually see the difference between muscle and fat.
And if that scan reveals this hidden malnutrition,
You need to increase functional muscle with targeted high-quality protein, maybe up to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Paired with appropriate exercise.
Regulated resistance exercise, yes. And at the same time, a managed reduction in total body fat. It's a complete recalibration of their nutritional plan.
Okay, and finally, let's just clear up the confusion around iodine itself, post-thyroidectomy.
Right. After a total thyroidectomy, the organ that was sensitive to iodine is gone.
So the long-term generalized fear of iodine is no longer relevant.
In fact, it's the opposite. Iodine intake from iodized salt or seaweed actually becomes necessary again. It supports other critical functions: cardiac rhythm, metabolism, mood. Of course, it has to be balanced with the hormone replacement therapy.
But the key is the blanket restriction is lifted.
The restriction is lifted.
So to summarize, this is a very strong framework, but we can make it even more impactful for the patient or the caregiver reading it.
I agree. I think there are 3 critical takeaways we've landed on.
First, you have to reframe that starve the tumor myth. It's not just about eating to be strong.
Right. It's about preserving the muscle mass required to physically tolerate the full, calculated, life-saving dose of your treatment. It's a pharmacological necessity.
Second, that individualization is non-negotiable, especially when managing comorbidities like diabetes. High-energy pureed foods are essential for dysphagia, but they have to be balanced to prevent dangerous blood sugar spikes.
And third, be aggressively clear about dietary restrictions. The goitrogens, the soy, the iodine, only restrict them when specifically told to by the medical team for a specific temporary reason.
And in that post-treatment phase, the focus must shift to finding and treating hidden malnutrition with advanced body composition analysis, not just looking at the number on a scale.
Exactly. Those refinements take this from good medical advice to a truly actionable, life-sustaining guide.
They do. We invite you to make these revisions and submit your related materials back to us for a future critique.